Hello everyone. My name is Ariel Palitz. I'm the Executive Director for the Office of Nightlife at the Mayor's Office of Media and Entertainment. I am joined by our city colleagues here today with Stephen and Julie and Judy from DOT and DCP and SBS. And we've invited you here today acknowledging, of course, that we know that today just happens to be the day that the Key to NYC vaccine mandate begins. Just wanted to mention that this is a coincidence that we scheduled this meeting today. We understand that everyone has a lot of questions about the vaccine and mandate. And for today, this particular meeting will be about open restaurants. And we ask you all to come today to just sort of provide some important reminders as well as information about the current and future of the program. So Stephen Picker from SBS will be discussing where you can get some more information about the vaccine mandates, and we will also be bringing more information to you about that in the future. But for today and for right now, this meeting is about open restaurants and making sure that you all have the information you need to ensure the success really of the future of the program, as well as to make sure that current compliance and safety is at the forefront in order to make sure that we're all on the right track moving forward, and to make sure you're aware of some things coming up in the near future. This is just an hour-long meeting today. Ordinarily, it's a bit longer. So we'll be giving some brief presentations and offering some information, and then we will be doing a Q&A, and we'll be doing the regular format where you can write your questions in the chat, and then we'll be addressing them. So before we begin with the presentations, I'll kick it over to Stephen Picker from SBS.
Hey all, for those who I have not had the pleasure of speaking to directly over your computers, my name is Stephen Picker and I lead a team at the New York City Department of Small Business Services called the Food and Beverage Industry Partnership. We have had the great good fortune to work side by side with most of the folks on this call for the last year and a half to help to bring you the Open Restaurants program and ensure that business owners' voices are being heard and being brought to the table in all conversations that are taking place inside city government about these initiatives. Very quickly, want to say, as Ariel mentioned, just perfect timing, perfect storm. Today being the start of Key to New York City. Want to be sure that although we're not going to take the time in this meeting to do a lot of answering of questions about that program, there are a lot of answers to your questions at the Key to NYC webpage. That link will be dropped in the chat here. I would definitely suggest you read through the executive order, read through City Hall's FAQ document that's there, which will answer a lot of questions and which is being revised on a 24-hour basis. And you can also download the required poster that needs to be posted outside your business from that webpage as well. So thank you all for being here. The last thing I want to mention is that, just a reminder, SBS has their hotline. SBS has virtual compliance advisors, and SBS updates the New York City Restaurant Resource Guide that are all there to help you should you require additional assistance in complying or understanding open restaurants and other city programs. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Stephen. So I believe that we will now kick it to Julie from Department of Transportation.
Thanks, Ariel, and thanks, Stephen. I'm Julie Shipper, Deputy Chief of Staff here at DOT, joined with my colleagues Judy and Karin, who are going to be here to also help answer any questions that you may have throughout. But we're going to start talking about just ways that restaurants can comply better with the setups that the guidance that we've put out. And so just want to remind everyone exactly on what that guidance is, make sure people are following it, and so that we can continue running this successful program and making it permanent. So just a reminder to everyone that setups should be, you can set up in front of your business or in the curbside, right in front of your business in the parking lane. Those setups should have barriers that are 18 inches width and 30 to 36 inches high. Reflective tape should be throughout all of the barriers. Snow sticks should be present. And plastic barriers can be in front of where oncoming traffic is coming into. Another note, just to mention, an 8-foot clear path should be maintained, and nothing should be allowed on the sidewalk adjacent to the curb. Again, just following, we want everyone to just make sure that they are continuing to follow all of the roadway rules that we've put in place. So there should be continuous protective barriers on all 3 sides. There should be no gaps in between. Barriers, again, 18 inches wide and 30 to 36 inches tall from the pavement to the top of the barrier. Barriers should have fully built walls and a base to hold filling, unless you're using one of the water-filled barriers or jersey barriers. Continuous reflective tape, again, around all sides of the edges of the barriers, and snow and reflective sticks should be added to the corners facing oncoming traffic. The ramp is required for ADA compliance, and this is something that we've really seen throughout the city. We want to make sure that everyone is able to use these setups. So either a ramp or your setup should be flush with the curb. No seatings or barriers should be within 15 feet of a hydrant. No seating or barriers within 8 foot of a crosswalk. Roadway seating cannot extend onto the sidewalks amenity zone, which we'll go into a little bit further of what that exactly covers. And again, we do not want anyone to be covering utility covers, blocking scaffolding, parking meters, other street furniture. We know that people set up very quickly, but we want to make sure that we're really maintaining all of these rules so that we can have a very effective program. Next slide. Similarly, we have a lot of rules for the sidewalk as well. And the big one here, I think that we want to make sure everyone is maintaining is this clear paths for pedestrians. A full 8 feet should be, is required and should be maintained. Structures should not be bolted into the sidewalk. We've seen this a little bit throughout the city, but just making sure that your structures are easily moved. Structures and tents should not block any of the right-of-way signs or any street regulations. We want to make sure that safety is of utmost importance here, and making sure those are kept clear. The establishment cannot remove any city property that is already installed on the sidewalk or curb. So this includes bike furniture, other street furniture that is on the sidewalks. No structures can be located in the amenity zone. Again, we'll get into that a little bit further. Heaters, not as much of a problem right now, but something to think about when winter comes again. Electric heaters are allowed on both sidewalk and roadway. The natural gas ones will only be allowed on the sidewalk, and portable ones, again, only on the sidewalk. No cooking or barbecues or open flames in the roadway or in the sidewalk seating, and seating must be removed when city agency or contractor needs to access that space. Next slide. So big, what is the amenity zone? This is that area, street furniture zone, defined as the section between the curb and throughout the zone in which street furniture is located, usually right next to the curb. And we want to make sure that that is kept clear, and not a place for open restaurants. Next slide. This is just, again, another picture showing you exactly where that zone is, and we want to make sure that seating is not in that space. Next. So for restaurants, DOT has distributed a number of water-filled barriers, and there may be upcoming giveaways coming up again, but for those restaurants that do have these barriers, those should be filled with water, and no gaps should exist in between them if you have a number of them. So if you just have one, just make sure that that is filled. If you have multiple of them, make sure there are no gaps in between. Next. I spoke a little bit about this before, but just making sure all of these structures are ADA compliant. So either by having a ramp that can be moved in and can be brought in and out when needed, or having the structure flush with the curb. Next. Again, we want to make sure that that 8-foot clear path is maintained for pedestrians. And this is a big one that we're seeing, where restaurants are taking up a little bit more space than is given to them. And we want to make sure that everyone is really sharing this space nicely with your pedestrians that are walking through. Next slide. The reflective tape, again, we want this on all sides so that at night, everyone is able to see what is set up in the street. And so you can see on the picture on the right is a very good setup with the reflective tape going all around. The picture on the left, not as great, needs to have that tape fully around. Next. Spoke again about this before, but just we want everyone to just really hit it home that the ADA accessibility is really, really important here. And so I want to make sure that all of the setups are complying, having some sort of ramp or being flush with the curb. Next slide. Just to make sure you're set up in the right spot. So you should not be set up in a no standing anytime zone or in a moving lane. And so that includes setting up in a bike lane, a bus stop. Any of those your structure will not be compliant. No standing anytime zone. We really want to make sure that those are kept clear. For areas that are no standing during certain times of the day, like 7 a.m. to 10 a.m., you cannot set up during those times, but after 10 a.m., you would be able to set up there. So just making sure you know exactly what's in front of your business and if you're able to set up there. Next slide. So this is just an example of a poor setup. We wanted to give some examples of poor setups and compliant setups so you have an idea of what you're looking at. Non-compliant, nothing should be attached to the building like this structure is. The canopy overhead is not allowed. There's also no 8-foot clear path on the sidewalk here. So this would not pass in our inspections. Next. Again, another poor setup. We haven't seen a lot of these recently, thank God, but just want to make sure that this would not comply in our inspections. The barriers are not thick enough, not high enough, and also not continuous throughout, and missing a lot of the reflective tape and some of the other compliant necessities needed. Next. This setup we really liked. And so you can see this is flush with the curb. The barriers are very thick, they're high, and there's reflective tape going fully around, making this a really safe setup and ones that we want to see throughout the city. Next slide. So this just goes into all of the things this does have. This setup, again, is very, very compliant, has thick barriers, high barriers, clear path on the sidewalk, nothing is drilled into the ground. And so just as, we want to make sure that everyone is seeing what a good one looks like and continuing to follow all of the rules. Next slide. Again, just showing exactly what is good here. The ADA compliance is shown, and really this is just a great setup all around. And I think that is it here. We just wanted to, kind of drill home here exactly what we're looking for so that restaurants are able to follow and we're able to run this successful program and continue it into its permanency. So I'll turn it over to Judy now, who's going to talk a little bit about what the permanent program is going to look like and what's to come.
Okay, great, thanks. And I think Nightlife also put together a really fantastic resource, which can be shared a little bit later. But we know that was a lot of information. It's on the website, but we also have a nifty checklist of just the most frequently observed infractions that I believe Ariel or her team will pass it on shortly. So for now, I'll share my screen again. Go. Okay, so the second thing we wanted to run through really quickly today was just a quick update on where things stand with the permanent open restaurants program. I know a lot of people are very eager to hear an update. So just for the next 10 minutes or so, I'll take us through where things stand from a more programmatic standpoint. The basics are that we'll still continue to give the option for both sidewalk and roadway seating. But the program will look to better balance the many needs of the street and sidewalk, and it'll keep both restaurants and other users in mind. And we're going to take what has and hasn't worked in the past, both pre-COVID and now during the emergency, when developing these future guidelines. So, of course, there have been successes and challenges over the past year. We've learned both positive and negative lessons in that time, and those lessons are really critical to informing how we proceed. So on the positive side, we think the robust use of the program was helped along by three things. First, unlike pre-emergency with the Sidewalk Cafe program, no geographies were off limits, and any restaurant with ground floor frontage and sidewalk or roadway space that met the criteria could participate. Second, the program was free and easy to access. Also, unlike the pre-COVID Sidewalk Cafe program, which required lots of review, lots of time by multiple agencies. And third, the element of roadway dining gave restaurants brand new options, particularly those that might not have had enough room on the sidewalk to accommodate a cafe. It is also worth noting a few lessons learned from the emergency program. On the other hand, we know the speed of the rollout and the fact that the program was built from scratch under emergency circumstances was not always smooth. And as DOT learned more about operating a program like this, and the program was extended by the mayor into the winter, some of the guidance had to change along the way to keep everyone safe. Second, throughout the program, DOT learned more about the challenges specific to the roadway seating and its interaction with the roadway. So for instance, we heard from agencies like the fire department and MTA that they had issues with turning large vehicles and safety signs being blocked. And because safety is of utmost importance here, and will remain so, we will work very, very hard and closely with our agency partners on that. And third, enforcement has been complicated on multiple fronts. So on the one hand, we had restaurants who were dealing with a lot and who felt squeezed and over-inspected by too many different people. But on the other hand, we have some communities like the mobility impaired who were concerned about under-enforcement. So this is all stuff that we're working on balancing now and making sure that everyone wins. That being said, the program has seen tremendous participation, including from you all. And as you know, hopefully in April, the City Council voted overwhelmingly in favor to make the bill permanent. And it'll require a number of different laws that control outdoor dining, which we're working on now. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit now about what we're proposing for the permanent program. So to start, we anticipate that as in the emergency, DOT will administer a permanent option for both sidewalk and roadway seating with similar rules to current sidewalk cafes, but available citywide. We want to be sensitive to the traveling public, minding sidewalk clear paths and other rules around sound, hours of operation, things like that. And when they're final, specific design guidelines will be clear and will revolve around all of these principles that balance the use of sidewalk space by restaurant, but maximize the experience of openness and activation to the general public. So for most of the city, we're proposing around 8-foot clear paths or half the sidewalk width. In other areas, we're proposing 12 feet. And in some special cases, we may go down to 6. That's all getting worked out now. But again, it's all in the spirit of making sure that the traveling public is not feeling squeezed or pinched the way in some areas of the city they feel now. Okay, switching gears, we think introducing the roadway option is a tremendous new opportunity for restaurants, especially those who may have those narrow sidewalks. The city is working on how this will be set up permanently, but generally it'll be similar. Wherever you can park a car, generally you'll be able to set up an open restaurants setup. And again, we're balancing public safety, we're balancing enforcement on sound, hours of operation, and ADA compliance. In the future, roadway setups we are anticipating will look a lot more like what's in this slide, not as much the fully enclosed structures that we've been seeing a lot of lately. Something more like this, which is a little easier to dismantle and move. And the city's proposing that the new program will not operate during colder months, but with some opportunity for a hardship waiver that would allow restaurants to keep their setups in place. But for now, just to be clear, all restaurants will be able to keep operating uninterrupted through this upcoming winter season. So January, February coming up, you'll still be able to keep operating as is. Okay. So in looking to move some of the legal authority to run the program to DOT and to create those processes, the city is also looking to streamline the review process as much as possible, while leaving in place the essential roles of agency and public review. So we're really counting on making the review process a lot faster, a lot simpler, fewer clicks to the extent that's practicable. And this is just a quick overview of some of that legal stuff that needs to happen, but generally we need 3 steps to advance. And the first that we're dealing with today as a city family is removing locational prohibitions through zoning. And so that's just the first step that we're on now. It's the key to unlocking the full citywide universe of applicability. It consolidates control under DOT. And we're working with City Council, who of course strongly support this program, to enact the appropriate legislation to update the laws around all this. So that's just a little very quick update on what the city is working on now. When those zoning and legal changes are effectuated, we anticipate next steps being rulemaking, which will further formalize many of the program design and application details. And then we'll formally open up the application window for the new program. So all this to say, we're kind of in the early stages of developing the future program. And again, just to reiterate, the current emergency program is expected to be in effect as is for the next 1.5 years or so. And so the expectation is that restaurants will have ample time to transition into a new process if you choose to, with minimal operational disruption. And so each step here that you see does involve some level of public input and review, which we can keep you posted on as they come up. So just to sum up, we think COVID-19 did have a very small silver lining, which was that it did shape the way New Yorkers think about how our streets can be used. And we're really excited that this program is going permanent, and we do strongly welcome feedback, and we do strongly encourage all to visit our website. DOT does not just make rules in a vacuum. We do want to hear from you. And so this is one way you can get to us. Just go to nyc.gov open restaurants. You'll see a link pretty prominently displayed there where you can fill out a web form and give us your thoughts. And in addition to using our web form, we encourage you to participate in shaping the program by attending an upcoming text amendment public review meeting. So these meetings are required as part of the zoning text changes, and they are required in each of the 59 community boards of New York City. So you are in one, and you know they've also been forums for feedback from restaurateurs and the communities they serve. So we think balanced viewpoints are absolutely critical. So this is just what we have scheduled now that are coming up. And of course, again, we can figure out a way to maybe keep this information updated for you, and especially as the additional meetings get scheduled as later on in the fall. And that's it for me. I think I'll pause there and we can move on to some Q&A.
Thank you, Judy. I think, Carolyn, are you going to step in now with a few remarks as well?
Oh, thanks, Ariel. I think Judy mostly covered it, but I'll just say thanks to everyone for being here. Carolyn Grossman, I'm leading the effort with city planning. So particularly, as Judy mentioned, on the zoning side, which is the first sort of public legal process that we're going through related to all of the changes needed to make the program permanent. As Judy highlighted, the first step of that zoning change is going to all of the community boards within the city. So we were at many in June. There are many that she showed on the screen that are scheduled coming up in September, and there will be even more coming up in September. There are 59 community boards in the city, as well as 5 borough presidents, all of whom have until September 27th to complete their review. So just echoing what Judy said, we're happy to share that information, but also encourage you to be in touch with your local community boards to see when they will be reviewing the process and to be part of that. We expect that the text amendment would go to the City Planning Commission for a citywide hearing in early October. And then assuming the City Planning Commission will hear it and will make a vote, assuming they do choose to approve it, it will go to the City Council for also a public hearing and review later this year. So those are the first legal actions where you have an opportunity to participate in shaping specifically that zoning element, which is, as Judy spoke to, is really about making sure that all locations in the city have the opportunity to be participants in the program. I think we've estimated of the 11,500 restaurants that are participants in open restaurants today, truly a stunning number. 10,000 restaurants are using the sidewalk portion, which is really where zoning comes into play. Zoning regulates sidewalk usage. It does not regulate the roadway usage. And of those 10,000 that are in the open restaurants program today, about 2,500 of those either wouldn't be allowed under zoning or would be limited under zoning. So when we're changing the zoning to make more opportunities available, it's really about those restaurants that may not have the opportunity to continue beyond the emergency if the zoning stayed in place. I'll drop a link in the chat as well, so you can learn more information and see where your restaurant may fall. And if you are in an area that would be prohibited under zoning, it may be especially important for you to speak out and talk about the opportunity to continue this program post-emergency. Those areas tend to be under elevated rail lines in certain special zoning districts, in some of the more congested areas of the city, like around Grand Central and the Central Business District, and some of the areas in the East and West Village, as well as restaurants that exist in residential areas. So normally in a residential area, you can't have a restaurant, but many restaurants do exist in those areas, and they have traditionally not been able to access cafes. But the zoning change here will make that possible for on an ongoing basis. So again, just encourage you to be aware of that process, and we'll send more information. Happy to answer questions about it.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. So yeah, that was a lot of information, but the real purpose of this call is just to make sure that everyone is updated on all of the current information and to let you guys know what are the most common compliance issues. The goal is really to make sure that the existing permanent program as it is as safe and compliant as possible, to ensure that the permanent program is on the right track. And so we actually, together with our partners at SBS and everyone on this call, put together a simple checklist that Jose can put up. It's really not like a what to expect when you're being inspected checklist, like regarding enforcement, but it's more of a checklist for you to ask yourself, am I compliant? And it's really just, this is not a comprehensive list. It's the most common issues that were sort of detailed throughout the call. And again, if we're able to make sure that you guys are compliant and addressing the quality of life issues that are coming up, as well as safety issues, it will only help support the trajectory of the permanence of the program. And also just to encourage you to really be tapped in to these public hearings that were brought up. We want to make sure that the operators and the patrons and those who are really supportive and participating in the program also have an opportunity to share their voice. in these public forum conversations. So the real message is just continue to do your part, as difficult as this all is, to make sure that you have the compliance checklist, the safety checklist, and that you're participating in the process as we move forward. So with that said, we have about 25 minutes left to address the questions that are accumulating, and people, the panelists can also help to address these in the chat, and Jose, the Deputy Director of the Office of Nightlife, will go through them and ask them to the panelists now. Thank you.
Hi, there's a question that says one of the structures that was shown in the presentation was not fully open on two sides. And so the question is that no longer a requirement for outdoor seating?
I think we're talking about this, and maybe some people can nod from you. I can't really tell, but so this was actually a required. So having two sides open was a requirement when there were very strict restrictions on indoor dining. So at the time that this was erected, I'm guessing they would have had to have followed indoor dining capacity limits. But insofar that the barriers meet a certain height and have a certain thickness and have the reflective tape and are filled, I assumed, this would have met DOT's requirements for the barriers themselves. It's just the indoor dining rule would have applied because it didn't have that cross breeze flow for ventilation.
Okay, thank you. There's a question that asks, are cease and desist letters still being issued to participants in this program?
Yeah, cease and desist letters are still being issued where necessary. As our inspectors go out, if they find restaurants that are not in compliance, it starts with a warning letter first and then goes to a cease and desist letter after, if no changes are made.
Okay, there's a questioner who says, after 18 months of inspections, a recent inspector informed them that their outdoor seating was out of compliance because there was a utility pole on the sidewalk. Do they have any recourse for that?
If you can send us the address, we can take a look and let you know. I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay, we have a questioner with a business that's located in front of a city bike. Are there any exceptions to that, or is there an opportunity for them to relocate their outdoor dining?
There is not an opportunity to relocate your outdoor dining. You can still, depending on how wide the sidewalk is there, potentially have seating right in front adjacent to your building. But if there is a city bike station in the roadway, we cannot relocate the city bike station, and there's not an opportunity to have roadway dining there.
We have a question about what the role of community boards is going to be in the future permanent program. Will businesses be required to present before those community boards? And will the boards have the ability to potentially deny applicants based on their own criteria and preferences?
Community boards will still have a say. Not every restaurant will have to present to community boards, but it will kind of go in batches to community boards. But they will still have some input here.
Okay, should businesses expect additional guidance for roadway seating going into this winter? And will there be an additional supply of the Jersey barriers or sandbags for participants again this year?
As we're thinking about the winter season, guidance will be similar to that of last year's winter season, and similar to what we have in place right now. Additional barriers and giveaways are something that we're looking into, and restaurants will be notified if there are additional giveaways.
Okay. Can any part of an outdoor structure be touching the adjacent curb? This business has a fire call box in front of their restaurant, and is asking how far the structure needs to be away from that call box, as well as a bicycle parking rack, which is also near that space.
It's hard to tell without knowing the address and exact setup. So again, if you're able to send us the address, we can look into it.
Okay. One business is asking how they can remove a cease and desist order after making the necessary changes.
That's a great question. When an inspector will come back and check for compliance, if you have made your necessary changes and you would like for us to come back sooner, I think sending the address and letting us know where we can do that. Otherwise, waiting for the inspector to come back on their next check.
Okay, there's a few sub-questions to this question. First, does the ADA ramp need to be permanently installed, or are they able to have a movable ramp available to comply? I think you addressed this in the presentation.
Yeah, they're able to have a movable ramp. It can be inside, but if an inspector comes, I would just suggest that you show them that ramp so that they know that you have it.
Is it permissible to have an access door for garbage collection built into a barrier?
No.
Okay. Does the 8-foot clearance need to start after the amenity zone at the curb?
Yes.
Do street cleaning signs need to be visible from the street?
Yes.
And what are the acceptable noise decibels allowed?
There should be no excessive noise permitted. Noise should not, the exact decibel, I don't know off the top of my head, but excessive noise is not permitted in this program.
Yeah, we can share a link to the noise code.
Thank you.
If I could just jump in here and just note that obviously the noise code is the decibel restriction that is relevant. But one of the things that I think we've been hearing from community boards is really about amplified sound, which is prohibited regardless of the decibel level. So I would just focus restaurants, really first and foremost on the fact that the amplified noise is not permitted. And secondarily, obviously excessive noise when we're talking about, very large and sort of rowdy crowds, those could be triggering the noise codes. But in most cases, I think the primary concern that we've been hearing is about the amplified noise.
Okay, we have a question about the fee structure for this program in the future.
So the fee structure is something that we are still determining and looking into. There will be a fee. We just do not have an exact answer on what it will be yet, but something that we are actively working on. And the mayor and city hall have want this program to be accessible to everyone, and so the fee will be compliant with that.
Okay, we have a business that's in front of an area with a no standing window for morning street cleaning. This is on Columbus Avenue in Manhattan. And then they're wondering if it's possible to get an exception to allow roadway dining there.
They can have roadway dining after the street cleaning is over. So if it ends at 10 a.m., they can have roadway dining past that.
Okay. Is seating allowed above a subway grate?
I don't believe so. No.
Yeah, the questioner says that in their community board, their understanding was that they were not allowed.
That's correct.
Okay. Is it still a requirement that outdoor tables be placed 6 feet apart?
No, the social distancing requirements have been lifted.
Are businesses allowed to play music from inside the restaurant to outside patrons?
Again, no amplified sound. So if you're able to keep this at a low level, but it should not be excessive and
loud. The clarifying question about an issue we addressed before, will the outdoor setups be permitted to have 3 sides covered during the winter time?
As winter guidelines come out, we'll, with everything changing and the Delta variant, coming, being in existence, we're, figuring out exactly what will be allowed. But at this time, 3 sides covered is allowed. Unclear of what's to come.
And just to also clarify that the rules may change now because we are still in an emergency condition, right? What Judy's presentation focused on is the creation of the permanent future rules, which will not go into effect for anyone until 2023. So just to keep in mind that right now, DOT is still managing an emergency program, which may change as health conditions change, and also building the permanent rules for the future, which once they are written into law will not change except through, legislative action. So, just encouraging folks again to, as DOT has mentioned here, you can send notes to DOT as they're building those permanent rules. The hope here is that those future rules will be very clear and quite permanent, just as the pre-COVID rules were. So we're in a little bit of a different condition now where they are still changing and adjusting to the emergency condition.
Okay, we have a question from a business who says the inspectors have visited when they are closed. And is looking to contact DOT to request a compliance inspection when they are open to show that they have an ADA accessible ramp. What's the best way for them to do that?
And if you are able to send us your address, we can work to have an inspector come out to do a compliance inspection.
Julie, could you provide the best email or way for people to contact DOT with these questions and follow-ups?
Yeah, this is
We
Karen.
can-
I actually just put a link in
Okay.
response to one of those questions.
Okay. Maybe if you could maybe mention it out loud so that for those who maybe don't have access to the chat. I think you're muted.
It's not a very direct link to read out loud.
Okay.
But maybe since it's in the chat, you can share with the participants afterwards.
Okay, we will. We'll make sure you guys have contact information.
There's a question asking about the timing of the permanent program. Just to clarify, has this program been extended past September 21? And what's the timing for getting the permanent program in place?
The temporary program will be in place until winter 2022 through winter 2022. And the permanent program will start in 2023. That's given, that the emergency is over by then, which, hopefully that is the case.
And again, also just confirm that is assuming that everything is adopted as intended. As we discussed in the presentation, there is a text amendment that is currently in a public review process that requires adoption by the City Planning Commission and the City Council. So it really is important for restaurants to be speaking up in that process to ensure that that component is adopted, and that following components of legislation and rulemaking, which will continue in the public sphere for the next year, that those are also adopted. So, just there's a schedule here, but it is not a fait accompli. There are multiple legal actions that are really needed, and it's important for restaurants to speak up and ensure that they're adopted in a form that really works for restaurants.
We have a business with their roadway structure on top of a manhole. Are they required to clean out that area for Con Ed to access?
Yes, if Con Ed needs to access it, they are required to do that.
To what extent is the business responsible for sanitation, such as rat control? They're saying that garbage piling up from several nearby buildings does create a problem.
Similarly to the business, however, the business did their sanitation pickup before, should be complied with. Making sure that your setups are clean and trash is not piling up there is important. So I think however you've done your sanitation pickup before, that is the same that should be done currently.
Okay, I think we did address this earlier, but I am seeing a few additional questions about the allowance for expanding space into adjacent properties. Is that going to be permitted in the permanent program?
No, there will be no adjacent locations allowed.
There is a question, is it possible to remove the heavy barriers, I'm assuming those are roadway barriers, and store them?
Store them. The city is not storing them. If you need to store them somewhere else, that is up to the restaurant to figure out where and how to store them.
Yeah, I think the question means temporarily on a day-by-day basis. Yeah. Is there a limit to the number of seats a venue is allowed?
At this time, there's no limit now that the social distancing orders have been lifted.
We have a question about a flush tree well. At one point, they're saying that this was not an issue, having a tree if the tree well was flush. Does this allowance expected to continue?
I don't know that I understand the question.
I'll take this one. So I think this is about under the pre-COVID sidewalk cafe rules. A tree pit that had walls is considered an obstruction, but a tree pit that doesn't have walls is not considered an obstruction. So the expectation is that would continue. And in general, the expectation is that the pre-COVID rules for that were under the DCWP program will mostly be moved over, right? But we know that there are places that have come up where they need to be modernized. For instance, the old DCWP rules did not even contemplate city bike. So there are things that need to get added to those obstruction lists. That being said, I would say to everyone again, and just to continue to reiterate, the permanent programs design rules are under development. People can send comments in, and there will be more process and sort of public awareness about those design rules before they are fully adopted. But the pre-COVID sidewalk cafe rules are the base that's being used.
Okay, we have a clarifying question asking if businesses can continue their current setups through March 2023. They're looking to have a bit of clarity on this point so that they can gauge how much to invest in their current setups.
So again, the temporary program will run through 2022. The permanent program will start in 2023. And before the permanent program starts, there will be an application process for you to apply to the permanent program. So I would say you're good until 2022. And, you know, given anything can happen with the emergency orders, and you would then have to apply for the permanent program.
Okay, I'm seeing another question about a tree pit. I'm not sure I understand it fully, but I believe their outdoor structure was built before the new open restaurants regulations came about. And they're looking to file for an exception.
There are no exceptions at this time, so you'd have to comply with the new guidelines.
Okay, related question. Someone is looking for an exception that has a crosswalk next to their business, but no vehicular traffic on either side.
You cannot set up in the crosswalk, but you can set up in the roadway if, again, if allowed with the parking regulations. I don't know exactly what is in front of your business.
Okay. Is DOB involved in the guidelines for outdoor structures for the permanent program?
We're working with a number of city agencies to develop the guidelines, and DOB is one of them that will be able to weigh in, yes.
Okay, we answered this, I believe, earlier, but do we know if there will be fees in the future for the permanent program?
Yes, there will be fees for the permanent program. We are still deciding and still working on exactly what those fees will look like, but there will be fees.
Okay. I saw a question answered in the chat, but just wanted to ask it for everybody's benefit. Are privately owned public spaces or POPs zones available to be designated as open restaurant seating?
No,
I
dear. Or go ahead, Carolyn.
Just to say the POPs program is is separate from the open restaurants program. So under the emergency condition, some rules have been lessened in I should say privately owned public spaces. For those who aren't familiar, this is a zoning program that allows a building to be larger in exchange for providing public open space. So in those publicly accessible private spaces, some of those rules have been suspended during the emergency. The restaurants that are using that are not part of the open restaurants program, and that change is not anticipated to go beyond the emergency. So the POPs program is really a separate program that's being handled independently.
We have someone who's just asking for us to repeat the timeline for the permanent program. I think they may have been unable to hear previously. The
emergency program will go through 2022 and the permanent program will start in 2023.
If I could just also add, people should understand that this is the city trying to give some confidence to what really is an emergency and changing situation, right? The program as it is currently authorized is authorized under emergency authority that the city is extending into 2023 so that the permanent program can be ready and there can be a healthy and seamless transition to that permanent program that itself is going through multiple legal stops. So, you know, people should feel some confidence in those timelines, but also understand that they are not set in stone. The adoption of the future permanent program is not set in stone. That is those are the proposals that the city is trying to, you know, implement now through these multiple legal processes. And that's why it's so important for restaurants to be part of those processes to really ensure they get done, that they get done in a way that is, you know, acceptable to restaurants and on a time scale that is acceptable to restaurants, right? All of these are really subject to the legal implementation process. So I just want people to really understand that these are not, you know, date certain assumptions. These are things that the city is trying to have confidence and set a projection for.
Okay, Carolyn. Jose, is that all the questions? Yes. So I just want to thank everyone again for joining today. These are very complicated, difficult times. You guys are doing great, managing and navigating everything that's coming your way. I want to thank all the city agencies on this call today. Everyone here is here for you and available to answer your questions. The contact for us is in the chat. We will be sending a copy of the recording in a follow-up email. I encourage you all to join the newsletter for the Office of Nightlife to stay updated. And Stephen, if you want to reiterate where people can get the SBS website and hotline to answer additional questions.
Sure, we dropped in the chat the restaurant resource guide, which is the best one-stop shop for all SBS services, including the hotline number, the virtual compliance advisor contacts, and all other resources that SBS is providing for this and other programs.
And we know there's a lot of questions coming up regarding the vaccination mandate and Key to NYC. Those will be coming as well as more information comes as we get to the enforcement date, which is September 13th. Right now, it is just being implemented for you all to start the program. But as the enforcement details come out, we'll also be sharing those with you. And we've reached time. Again, thank you all so much. Thank you to DCP and DOT and SBS and to the Office of Nightlife. And thank you all. Stay safe, stay strong.